Right, and to help us unpack the stakes and possible outcome of the Geneva meeting, the Geneva European-Iranian meeting, we are joined by two distinguished guests, Professor Gilles Emmanuel Jaquet, Vice President of the Geneva International Peace Research Institute, and Mr. Ihab Omar, journalist and writer at Al Ahram newspaper from Cairo. Good evening to you, or good afternoon, and welcome to Qnews and to In Depth. Let me start with Mr. Jaquet. And what could be the main objectives for the European participants, and do they differ from the U.S. approach or the U.S. aims?
We have different positions between the European Union and the USA for years now over the issue of the Iranian nuclear program. Both positions were more or less aligned, or I'm not going to say similar, but on the same page at the time of the Obama administration. But since the first mandate of President Trump, when President Trump ended the previous agreement, then both positions were very then different. So the European position is more favorable to a diplomatic solution compared to the US approach.
Right. Ms. Omar, how do you think Iran is likely to approach those talks, given the recent Israeli attacks?
تحياتي لحضرتك وللسادة المشاهدين
you and
ولضيفك
to the
الكريم
viewers and the honorable guests. Thank you so much for having me. Europe is halfway between Iran and America geographically and also on the political level, because Europe has formed the European Troika for mediation between Iran and the US, and it was a very successful mediation experience. And this indicated that indicates that we are about to see European political action that might actually take us to an agreement between both parties, the US and Iran, and there is European keenness to make these talks succeed. It's not just a symbolic talks, but to give time to Iran, but it is in the best interest of all parties to stop the aggressions, as Europe will be the first one to be harmed by the waves of displaced. And even if there are nuclear strikes, Europe falls in the ecological environmental parameter of these strikes. So whether the strike will be in Iran or Israel, Europe will be affected. And stemming from that, Europe is very interested in making this work, and I think the ball now is in the Iranian and the US courts. Are there real intentions to stop the war and cease the hostilities, or that each party has an agenda to continue the war?
Right, but we are speaking here about a ball in the hands of the European, who will be negotiating with the Iranians. Now, Professor Jaquet, in your view, or from your point of view, what would be the main obstacles in building trusts, or bringing a kind of bridges of trust between Iran and the European states and the Western powers in general at this very particular stage?
Well, it's a very difficult and challenging context to achieve a long-lasting, let's say, agreement on this issue. The US are not part of the negotiation. It's not the same context as used to be at the time of the Obama administration. We have, well, goodwill clearly on the side of the European Union, but at the same time, we have statements from EU leaders, or especially the French President Emmanuel Macron, who officially stated that he would provide all the required support for the defense of Israel. How can it help to strike an agreement, to have a deal on this nuclear issue? We have as well a very tense regional context as well. So it's not sure how the agreement would be supported by other regional powers. Moreover, to have a successful and long-lasting agreement, we should have the US. It's very difficult. And there should be as well support or guarantees provided as well by the Russian Federation, that was as well very instrumental in all these negotiations with Iran in the past. And especially you have agreements between Iran and Russia that help in a way to limit the military nuclear ambitions of Iran. So overall, I would say it's not the best geopolitical and diplomatic context we have to, let's say, have a kind of consensus among, let's say, Russia, the US, European Union on one side, and Iran on the other. The previous, let's say, actors are rather fragmented.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Omar, as we said, the court now is in rather the ball now is in the court of the Europeans to get a solution that could be convincing to all parties. Now, how or what could be Iran's main diplomatic priorities at this very particular stage?
Iran only wants a ceasefire at this particular stage, even if there is no agreement yet regarding the nuclear program. The first Iranian demand is a ceasefire, and then we can talk about the nuclear file. To my estimate, Europe will approve of this, and the European proposal will be agreeing on a ceasefire and a new nuclear understanding with one package, but separating a ceasefire from the nuclear file is completely rejected for Europe and for the United States. And I think that the statement issued by the G7 after Trump left by rejecting a nuclear Iran states that Europe agrees and the major powers of the world agrees with the United States regarding rejecting an Iranian state named Iran. And separately, Britain rejected the idea, then France, then Germany, and Italy. So there is a Western consensus regarding that Iran cannot be a nuclear state. And the simplest thing here that this should result in freezing the nuclear program or cancelling it altogether, but there will be no separation between the military action and the nuclear file. According to the US calculus, a ceasefire is pending the cancellation of the nuclear program.
Professor Jaquet, how have recent Israeli actions affected the European leverage in these negotiations?
Well, I would say that the European Union is, in a way, a supporter of Israel with what we saw, what happened in Gaza. We don't see, from my point of view, a very strong opposition or pressure on Israel. As said previously, you have some European Union leaders like the French President Emmanuel Macron, who brought their vocal support to Israel. So the question here is about as well the unity and credibility of the European Union in this negotiation process. If Iran doesn't see as well any credibility from the side of the EU, what kind of security guarantees could it receive? So that will be very difficult. I'm not much optimistic, to be frank with you.
Let me here say it in other way. Do you think that the European states will have leverage over Israel?
Well, which European states? Because to have leverage over Israel, and especially to stop its military operations, current military operations against Iran or other regional countries as well, the US first should stop providing weapons or any other relevant material to Israel. European states as well, some EU member states are providing material, different types of equipments, not necessarily weapons, but equipments that can be used as well for the Israeli war efforts. So it's going to be very difficult, honestly, for EU countries to put sufficient pressure on Israel. It will come from the US, I guess.
Right, Mr. Omar, to which extent do you think Israeli actions are undermining all diplomatic efforts so far?
To my estimate, this war started for certain reasons and it will end only if these goals are achieved. More accurately, Israel is the 51st state in the Middle East, and Israel is not moving in isolation away from the US demands and requests. Israel is a tool for negotiation with Iran, and the military escalation was part of the US negotiations with Iran. It can be only one of the Geneva rounds or the Rome rounds, but it's using military, not diplomacy. And as long as there is no an agreement between Iran and the Israel, the war will continue. And this is not contradicting with diplomacy, because those who are practicing diplomacy with Iran are the one ordered the aggression. The war will end with the cancellation of the nuclear Iranian program, and Israel has another goal, which is to take down the Iranian regime itself. The US now is seeking the cancellation of the nuclear file, and then stopping Israel will be very easy, provided that the Iranian regime is already starting to fall out due to the strikes. For the first week of strikes, I see this as an outreach. The first week was to set the rules of engagement between Iran and Israel, a different rules compared to 2024 and the other previous engagements with proxy wars from Syria and Lebanon and Gaza. Iran was able to be resilient in the first week, and with the end of this week, yesterday, Iran directed a big strike to Israel, setting a new picture of engagement, waiting for the next second week, the week of negotiations. And I think this will be concluded in the third week. Will it be a ceasefire or a fall down of a certain regime?
Right, Professor Jaquet, what role is France playing in shaping the European approach to these negotiations?
Well, France consistently, it's a long-term position. I mean, it's not new. France consistently called to resume negotiations with Iran to avoid any conflict, while at the same time making clear that we didn't want to see a nuclear Iran. And when I mean nuclear, it's not a civilian energy power I'm talking about. It's more about nuclear military power. Now, once again, we have very strong, not maybe not strong ties, but once again, strong statements that came from the French government in support of the Israeli government. We had as well a kind of erratic or chaotic foreign policy from France when it comes to the Middle East. Remember, President Macron called about, considering the independence for Palestine, and then he changed his mind. So with Iran as well, we have more or less a similar position. The French government is talking about negotiations, but it's in a way pretty hostile towards as well the current leadership in Iran. And at the same time as well, for France, a very peculiar situation because we have French stages in Iran. So France cannot as well be too confrontational. But once again, if the US are not really putting all necessary pressure in the balance as well and don't agree to come back to the table of negotiations, I'm not sure these negotiations will have a real tangible results.
Remains to be seen, of course. Mr. Omar, how does Iran interpret US signals about possible military action or the renewal or any renewed dialogue?
Iran is well prepared for the US aggression more than the Israeli aggression, as Iran has an announced plan to target the military bases of the United States in the Arab Gulf, in addition to the US bases in Iraq, Syria, and Jordan, Turkey, and the Southern Indian Ocean. The bombing the US embassy in Tel Aviv was a message from Iran stating that the Iranian retaliation is not going to be only bombing the military bases but all the US interests in the Middle East. Merz, the German chancellor, talked about Europe being able to protect the US interests in Europe, and this is a statement issued by a politician responding to the Iranian threat of threatening US interests. And there were also Iranian threats that they have 40,000 soldiers ready to actually be suicidal inside Europe. These 40,000 soldiers can actually carry out suicidal operations inside Europe, which is a direct threat of 40,000 terrorist operations if of Europe or the West started bombing Iran. Iran is prepared and ready to go to war with the West and with the United States. And the irony here that they weren't ready to face Israel, and that's why we saw Iranian failure at the beginning of these strikes.
Right, Professor Jaquet, you said that you're not sure that that there will be any kind of tangible results coming out from this dialogue, even though that this is in favor or in the interest of the whole world. If I may ask why, and do you believe that a technical agreement on Iran's nuclear program is achievable under current conditions?
Well, it's a very good question. We have two things. First, the first thing is that sure, the main issue is to prevent Iran to get military nuclear power. But well, Iran has in a way its own reasons. Iran saw what happened to Iraq, to Syria, Libya, and like North Korea or other countries as well. Iran considers that it's part of its deterrence to protect as well its vital national and strategic interests on its territory. But at the same time, if we consider that the sanctions could be left and there would be an agreement to just have a civilian nuclear energy in Iran, Iran would in a way lose most of its reasons to build nuclear weapons. As long as Iran is under strong pressure from Israel, from the US, from EU countries, it feels like being under siege, and it's one of the main arguments of the Pasdaran. So if we have a different context, like we had under President Obama, sanctions are lifted, we have economic recovery in Iran, we have security and diplomatic guarantees, and let's say some regional security deal about the Middle East, Iran would change its position, I guess, because as well the leadership is divided in Iran. The other thing as well, besides that, and it's clearly visible in the Israeli, let's say, approach and what the US wants, they want regime change. It's another, let's say, regime change operation. It's not just about nuclear power. So that's as well why we'll have this ongoing pressure from the US and Israel. Maybe as well, that's another, let's say, a scenario. Once Israel will exhaust most of its missiles or its arsenal, maybe it will be more prone to accept negotiations, but it's very optimistic and I doubt about it, because you have a strong opposition to any kind of nuclear program in Iran. And as well, there are calls for regime change in Iran, once again, from Israel, and as well from some political circles in the US, especially political circles around President Trump, because we have a lot as well of contradictory signals coming from the US administration.
So now we're speaking about a regime change rather than ending the nuclear ambitions. I'll get back to you, Mr. Jaquet. Mr. Omar, what could be the risks if the Geneva talks fail to produce tangible progress?
I think the United States will start bombing Iran if these negotiations fail. And the target here will be, as stated by Trump, that Iran will surrender, same as Japan in the Second World War and Germany in the Second World War. This is the Trump vision, or at least his administration or his political circle. Iran must surrender, and it has nothing to do with the nuclear program, it is only an excuse to bomb Iran because this decision was issued in 2023 to cancel the Iranian project in general, and it was not confined to the nuclear program. But talking about the regional project itself of Iran, and we have seen Israel with US assistance and intervention assassinated the Iranian arms in Lebanon, Syria, Gaza, and Yemen, and even they were neutralized in Iraq. So it was only logical to have the next strike as happened on Iranian soil. It's a game to take down the Iranian project altogether with military action, and it has nothing to do with the nuclear program. But if Iran makes the concession of the nuclear program, they will actually make the US miss the chance to target it militarily, and they will take down the proposal of continuing the war.
Yes.
Even if Israel had the purpose of taking down the Iranian regime, if when Iran announces freezing the nuclear program, they will not be able to continue the war.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Professor Jaquet and Mr. Omar, for your insights and deep analysis on this very critical moment in the international diplomacy.